There is a right way and a wrong way to construct your bench for the fantasy playoffs. On last week's episode, where I talked about how to build a strong starting lineup for the stretch run, I said that depth is the most overrated thing in fantasy football. And that is 100% true. But that doesn't mean you should be neglecting your bench. What I meant by saying depth is overrated is that I don't need or want backup quarterbacks or backup wide receivers or backup tight ends on my roster. I have no use for that outside of super deep leagues or leagues that don't have a waiver wire. However, there is absolutely value to be had by constructing a strong bench. But there is a right way and a wrong way to do it. Rather than stashing players that are so easily replaceable on the waiver wire, I want handcuff running backs. I want the guys with contingent upside. That's why once you get to the second half of the fantasy football season, I am completely shedding these fringe players. I'm talking guys like Xavier Legette, Jalen McMillan, Keenan Allen, Tyler Lockett, Dalton Schultz, Pat Freiermuth, Aaron Rodgers, etc. Guys I'm not starting. I have no plans to ever start. And if I ran into a situation where I need to start someone like that, I can easily find an equal value on the waiver wire for free. There is zero upside in keeping a Tyler Lockett on my bench. There are 30 Tyler Lockett's available on the waiver wire in almost every league. So instead, I am dropping the Tyler Lockett's of the world and filling my bench with as many handcuff running backs as I can find. As you might say to me, well, I can't start any of these handcuff running backs right now, so why would I keep them on my roster? Say, I don't know, Blake Corum, for example. Blake Corum has absolutely zero value to any starting lineup right now. But what happens if Kyren Williams were to sustain an injury? All of a sudden, Blake Corum is the waiver wire ad of the week. Everyone in your league is running to the waiver wire to bid on Blake Corum. Essentially, whoever has the most fab left is going to get him. He'd be a 100% fab guy. He'd be a full-blown bell cow in an offense that puts out a ton of work to the starting running back on the roster, and they provide a ton of touchdown opportunities. Blake Corum would be the league winner of all league winners. Tyler Lockett, on the other hand, is always going to be just Tyler Lockett. He gives us zero contingent upside whatsoever. You'll never win your league because Tyler Lockett was there to save the day. Even if you lose one of your starting wide receivers and you need to plug in Tyler Lockett for 12 points, great. But I can find 12 points on the waiver wire 8 days a week for free. Just look at Nick Westbrook-Akine or Marquez Valdes-Scantling last week, for example, or Jerry Jeudy, Elijah Moore. These are just a few examples of how easy it is to find usable weeks from wide receivers on the waiver wire. And when I talk about handcuff running backs, I don't just mean the handcuffs to the running backs on your roster. I am talking about all handcuff running backs. I don't need to roster Kyren Williams to benefit from Blake Corum. I don't need to roster James Conner to benefit from Trey Benson. We've already seen this strategy pay off in such a huge way this season. Look at Tyrone Tracy. He was either stashed or picked up off the waiver wire when Devin Singletary went down. And now he is winning people leagues. Jordan Mason, same thing. Sure, he's back on the bench now, but he was winning weeks for teams for 2 months when he was the guy with Christian McCaffrey out. Some handcuff running back is going to step forward and be the reason why someone in your league wins this year. I promise you that. So why wait and hope that you can get that guy off the waiver wire? Stash as many of them as you can now so you're ready for when that time comes, because that time will come. Losers are reactive, champions are proactive. But I would like to welcome you into episode 2 of Title Run, where we are going on a 6-week journey together on a quest for fantasy greatness. We're talking a new strategy just like this every week with the goal of setting up our teams from maximum upside and giving ourselves the best possible chance to take home the title. Today, we're focusing on constructing our bench, the importance of handcuff running backs, which handcuffs you should prioritize, and who you should drop from your team in order to acquire those guys. So if you're ready, sit back, strap up. Let's go on a title run. Welcome into Title Run. I am Alex Johnson, and this is Yards per Fantasy. Let's start with the top 10 handcuff running backs that you need to stash on your roster right now. One of these guys could end up being the reason why you win your fantasy championship. These are the guys with contingent upside. These are the league winners. We are going to start at number 10. Number 10 is Braylon Allen. Braylon Allen is the handcuff to Breece Hall. He would be higher on this list if the Jets' offense wasn't so dysfunctional. He flashed some upside early in the year, and he would be the bell cow if Breece Hall were to go down and get about 15 to 20 touches per game. He doesn't have the receiving upside that Breece Hall does necessarily, but he is a serviceable enough receiver out of the backfield. He's a big-bodied back who would be full-blown the guy in between the tackles, in the red zone, at the goal line. He'd be a weekly top 24 running back. And the Jets have the easiest or the second easiest schedule for running backs during the fantasy playoffs. They play the Jaguars in week 15. They play the Rams in week 16. And in the fantasy playoffs, it is the Bills, who give up a ton of fantasy points to running backs. The number 9 handcuff running back you need to stash is Jonathan Brooks. Jonathan Brooks is set to make his NFL debut in week 12, but it's not going to be the debut that many people were anticipating. He's not stepping in to be the bell cow, to be the starting running back for the Panthers. Chuba Hubbard now has a stranglehold on the RB1 job in Carolina. So that makes Jonathan Brooks the backup and one of the handcuffs that we do need to stash. We do need to stash Jonathan Brooks. And most people have been stashing Jonathan Brooks all season long anyway, but with the news or just the obviousness that Chuba Hubbard is going to maintain the starting job in Carolina, some people are dropping Jonathan Brooks. Some people are dropping him. Don't be that guy. And if somebody in your league dropped him, you need to pick him up because Jonathan Brooks needs to be stashed. He is now a top 10 handcuff in fantasy football. He's got an all-purpose skill set. He was very productive in his one season as the starter at Texas before he tore his ACL. He's an ultra-talented guy, ultra-talented running back. There was a reason why, even though they shouldn't have done it, there was a reason why the Panthers traded up in the second round to take Jonathan Brooks. He'd be much higher on this list if it weren't for coming off the injury and then being in a bad offense. But the Panthers do have a really good fantasy playoff schedule. They got the Cowboys in week 16 or in week 15, the Cardinals in week 16, and the Buccaneers in the fantasy championship. My number 8 handcuff running back is Kareem Hunt. Kareem Hunt is going to revert back to the bench with Isaiah Pacheco returning in week 12. Now, he might maintain a split backfield with Isaiah Pacheco for the first couple of weeks, but by the time the fantasy playoffs come around, it's going to be full Isaiah Pacheco in that backfield again which is going to make Kareem Hunt a pure handcuff, which is fine. He's still very valuable in that role. We really couldn't ask for much more from a handcuff running back than what Kareem Hunt has given us this year. He was the RB16 in fantasy points per game, averaging 15.2 fantasy points. He finished inside the top 24 running backs 5 out of 7 games. Now, he hasn't really been efficient. He's actually been pretty inefficient. He's not really explosive. He's not breaking off long runs, kind of touchdown dependent, but he's in a good offense. He gets a ton of work. It would be the same deal if anything were to happen to Isaiah Pacheco. And if he was more efficient, he'd be higher on this list. But he's not. I mean, he's an ancient Kareem Hunt. What do you expect? He gave us way more than we could have ever dreamed of from Kareem Hunt. So he's the number 8 handcuff running back that you need to stash. At number 7 is Zach Charbonnet. We got to see a little bit of Zach Charbonnet with Kenneth Walker out earlier in the season. He assumed a full bell cow role in weeks 2 and 3. He played 91.4% of the snaps. He averaged 16 carries per game, 4.5 targets per game. He had 5 red zone carries, 3 touchdowns over 2 weeks. And he scored as the RB8 in week 2, the RB7 in week 3, averaging 22 fantasy points per game over those 2 games. He's a big back with an all-purpose skill set and a quality offense that produces a lot of running back touchdowns. So Zach Charbonnet, an absolute must-stash. I actually saw an article this week. I can't remember the site. They should be embarrassed that they put it out. But somebody was saying you can drop Zach Charbonnet. Don't listen to that advice. You need to stash Zach Charbonnet. If you can afford to roster Zach Charbonnet, you need to be rostering Zach Charbonnet. He is one of the best handcuff running backs in fantasy football. If anything were to happen to Kenneth Walker again, we're going to get a full bell cow role for Zach Charbonnet. He'd be a must-start RB2 with RB1 upside every single week. Coming in at number 6 is Trey Benson. Trey Benson's a rookie out of Florida State. He's a 216-pound running back with 4.39 speed and an all-purpose skill set. He's an aggressive runner who doesn't go down easy. And he's a big play waiting to happen. I mean, with 4.39 speed, this guy can break off a long run at any moment. We don't get that from James Conner. He may not be quite James Conner between the tackles, but he's going to make up for that by being able to break off chunk plays at any moment. Trey Benson would be awesome. And James Conner, hate to tell you, James Conner is a ticking time bomb. He's an injury waiting to happen. He has never stayed healthy for a full season. He's only played more than 13 games just one time in his career. In the case of a James Conner injury, Trey Benson would immediately slide in as the number 1 running back in Arizona with weekly RB2 upside, or he'd be a weekly RB2 with RB1 upside every single week. He would take the lion's share of the carries and the red zone work. Amari DiMercado would be there as well. I'm not forgetting about Amari DiMercado, but some people are seeing some of the opportunities that Amari DiMercado has gotten over the last several weeks, and they are thinking that Amari DiMercado is the number 2 running back in Arizona. That's not true. Absolutely not true. If anything happens to James Conner, Amari DiMercado's role does not change. He's going to continue to be the passing downs back, the 2-minute drill back. He's going to stay in his lane, where Trey Benson is going to jump right in to take the same workload that James Conner is getting. And you know what? He might even be better. We just talked about his explosiveness. We're not getting 50, 70-yard breakaway runs, even 20-yard chunk plays from James Conner. We're going to get that from Trey Benson. And Arizona has the 3rd easiest fantasy playoff schedule for running backs. It's the Patriots in week 15, the Panthers in week 16, and it's the Rams in week 17. You need to stash Trey Benson. James Conner, like I said, he's a ticking time bomb, and Trey Benson would be a league winner if he ends up atop that depth chart due to a Conner injury. Breaking into the top 5 is Jordan Mason. Now, Mason would be number 1 on this list if it weren't for the emergence of Isaac Guerendo just before Christian McCaffrey came back. Unfortunately, though, as much as I love Isaac Guerendo, he's kind of muddied the Christian McCaffrey contingency plan. It's not quite as clear as it was early in the season that Jordan Mason's the guy. I think it would still probably favor Jordan Mason, but it's more likely to be a split between him and Isaac Guerendo rather than the bell cow situation that we saw in the first 9 weeks of the season. Still, though, Jordan Mason was highly productive in place of Christian McCaffrey. He was RB10 in fantasy points per game from weeks 1 through 7, which was before the shoulder injuries. He averaged 14.5 fantasy points per game. He had 18 carries per game. He averaged over 107 total yards from scrimmage per game. He was top 10 in yards per touch, top 10 in evaded tackles per touch. He was top 10 in runs of 15 yards or more. Those are according to playerprofiler.com. So while Isaac Guerendo has muddied the waters a little bit, Jordan Mason is still locked in as a top 5 handcuff running back in fantasy football. Do not drop Jordan Mason. Keep him stashed. Number 4 is Roschon Johnson. You just know I love talking some Roschon Johnson. And you know what? Thomas Brown is one of us, baby. Thomas Brown is one of us, the new offensive coordinator in Chicago. Thomas Brown is also a Roschon Johnson truther. He made that clear in week 11. Roschon Johnson played a season high 42% of the snaps in the first game that Thomas Brown took over calling plays in Chicago. He carried the ball 10 times, which matches his season high. He's been a favorite of mine since he's come out of Texas. If you follow anything that I've done at yardsperfantasy.com, right here on the Yards Per Fantasy YouTube channel, you already know that I love me some Roschon Johnson. It's exciting to see his role increasing. He's a 220-pound running back with elite pass protection skills. He can catch passes. I mean, who doesn't love a big running back who can catch passes at a high level? I mean, they're taking DeAndre Swift, who came into the league highly touted as a good pass-catching running back. They're taking DeAndre Swift off the field in passing situations in favor of Roschon Johnson. What do you think is going to happen if DeAndre Swift is out? Roschon Johnson is going to maintain that role and then some. So if Swift were to go down, Roschon's going to be the full-blown bell cow. He'd get the between the tackles work. He'd get the red zone work. He'd get the passing downs work. He'd essentially be doing exactly what Chase Brown is doing right now over the last few weeks in Cincinnati since Zach Moss has gone down. Chase Brown has taken 100% of the running back opportunities in Cincinnati since Zach Moss went down. I think we'd see a pretty similar thing from Roschon Johnson if anything were to happen to DeAndre Swift. Roschon Johnson is flying under the radar. Not a lot of people like Roschon Johnson. I don't understand why. You got to go pick him up. You got to stash him. Roschon Johnson can even give you a little bit of standalone value, but he could be a league winner if anything were to happen to Swift. Go get Roschon Johnson. Keep him stashed. Breaking into the top 3 is Tyler Algier. Algier's he's just a really good running back. That's all he is. He's a really good running back. That's why there's been moments throughout the season where it's been a little bit frustrating for Bijan Robinson managers taking Bijan off the field in favor of Tyler Algier. Now that's kind of faded a little bit over the last few weeks because just Bijan is just so damn good, but it's hard to keep Tyler Algier off the field. We've seen this across multiple coaching staffs at this point. They just love Tyler Algier. So what do you think is going to happen if anything happens to Bijan Robinson? We saw this in 2022, pre-Bijan Robinson era. Tyler Algier averaged about 5 yards per carry during that season on 210 carries. He ran for over 1,000 yards. That was his rookie season. He wasn't really the guy until the last 6 weeks or so of the year. He was dominant. He was dominant during that stretch. He would be the bell cow in the case of a Bijan Robinson injury. He'd have weekly top 12 fantasy running back upside. And if you look at the playoff schedule for the Falcons, they have the 5th easiest schedule for running backs during the fantasy playoffs. It's the Raiders, it's the Giants, and it's the Commanders. Tyler Algier would be a league winner. As would number 2, Blake Corum, baby. Blake Corum. Blake Corum was my number 2 or my number 1 handcuff running back coming into the season. Now, he still maintains that same massive upside that he did back then. If anything were to happen to Kyren Williams, Blake Corum would be the league winner of all league winners. And Kyren Williams, I hate to tell you, Kyren Williams is a major injury risk. He's 195 pounds. He's got a massive workload for 2 straight seasons. And there have been weeks this year where he's taken 99% of the snaps. They are running Kyren Williams into the ground, and injury is almost inevitable at this point. So if he goes down, Blake Corum becomes the full-blown bell cow in the Rams offense. He would assume the full Kyren Williams role. And we know Sean McVay prefers to ride one running back. We've seen it with Todd Gurley. We've seen it with Henderson. Why can't it Darrell Henderson? We've seen it now with Kyren Williams for 2 straight years. And it's continued again this year multiple times. If you listen to the broadcasters on Rams games this year, multiple crews have told us that Sean McVay has told them that he wants to get Blake Corum mixed in a little bit more. He wants more of a split backfield, but he just can't help himself. He can't help himself. He's continued to just force feed touches to his RB1. And that would be Blake Corum if he became the guy. Just force feeding touches to Blake Corum, just like he's doing for Kyren Williams. And Blake Corum can handle it. Blake Corum can absolutely handle that workload. He did it at Michigan, so we know he can do it. He's also bigger, stronger. He's more explosive than Kyren Williams. So he may even be more productive and less touchdown dependent than Kyren Williams. Blake Corum, I'm rooting for you, baby. Hashtag Team Corum. We're still here. We're still here. We're not going away. Blake Corum is your number 2 handcuff running back. And that means number 1 is Ray Davis. Ray Davis. We've seen it already with Ray Davis, which is why he's been able to get to number 1 on these handcuff running back rankings. When James Cook missed week 6 against the Jets, Ray Davis took 20 carries in that game. He got 3 passes. He had 152 total yards from scrimmage, and he had 18.2 fantasy points. And that was without a touchdown. And we know James Cook has scored 11 this year, so there are plenty of running back touchdowns available in the Buffalo offense. So imagine 152 total yards plus a touchdown or 2 from Ray Davis. Ooh, baby. Ooh, baby. Let's go, Ray Davis. And Davis, he's an exceptional receiver out of the backfield. I've talked about it before. I think James Cook is an overrated receiver out of the backfield. Ray Davis is actually really, really good in that area. So I'd expect a significant role as a pass catcher for Ray Davis if he were to become the guy. Now, I know there are some concerns about Ty Johnson, but he, just like I said with Amari DiMercato, Ty Johnson would maintain his current role. And that's not a projection. We saw exactly that in week 6 when James Cook missed. Ty Johnson maintained his usual role, exactly what he's done all year long. Ray Davis jumped right into that James Cook role, even exceeded it, took a ton of carries, ton of touches. He was the guy. So I do have a few more handcuff running backs. I just wanted to give you my top 10. Outside of my top 10, it's Jalen Wright at 11, Damian Pierce at 12, Tank Bigsby, Isaac Guarendo, Keaton Mitchell, Cam Akers, Kenneth Walker, Khalil Herbert, Gus Edwards, and Tyjae Spears would be my top 20 handcuff running backs. Now, there are also a few guys who are considered more than a handcuff. They're not the starter. They're not the guy in their backfield, but they're more of a split situation more than a handcuff. Now, of course, they do still have that contingency upside where if anything were to happen to their backfield mate, they would probably be league winners as well. But these guys are rostered anyway. That's your Bucky Irvings of the world, your Jalen Warren, Raheem Mostert, Justice Hill. These guys are already rostered, but their roles would increase for sure if anything were to happen to the starters in their backfield. Now, I do want to round out the show with I got 20 players that you can drop because we talked about constructing your bench properly at the beginning of the show. We want to prioritize these contingent upside players, specifically these handcuff running backs. So we got to make room on our bench. Who we dropping? Who are we dropping to pick up the Ray Davises of the world, the Jordan Masons, the Blake Corums, the Trey Benson, and so forth? I just got a few guys for you. Just a reminder, though, a disclaimer, you have to know your league. This advice that I'm about to give you is for an average, 12-team league with normal roster size, normal bench sizes, normal waiver wire settings and availability. You do have to take some responsibility here and know if this advice is going to translate to your specific league or not. Now, you can feel free to ask me in the chat or in the comments of the video, and I'll let you know. But you do have to take some responsibility here to understand what I'm about to tell you. Now, you also have to keep in mind there are still bye weeks. Right now, week 12, bye Mageddon. There's some more bye weeks in week 14 as well. So keep that in mind and know you got to plan ahead for those. You might not be able to drop everybody from your roster, but in a typical situation, these are the guys I'm dropping. You just don't need to stash. These are not must drops. You just don't need to stash. You don't need to keep these guys. And if you're basically my motto here, if you are not going to start them, drop them. If you're not going to start them, drop them. They're worthless to your roster. If you're not starting them in your starting lineup, they're easily replaceable on the waiver wire. And other fantasy analysts around, YouTube, Twitter, articles, whatever, wherever you get your fantasy advice, they are probably going to tell you to either hold these guys or even add them off the waiver wire. I've seen some of these guys on waiver wire content this week. But I am giving you permission to drop them for these guys with a contingent upside. And some of these guys are going to give you productive weeks. They are. These are not zeros. They are not zeros. I know this is a long disclaimer. I just want you to know these are not zeros, but they're not making or breaking your team. I'd rather have these league-winning upside locked and loaded handcuff running backs. So just going to go through them. 20 players you can drop. Deontay Johnson. I talked about it on the Breaking Fantasy Football show a few weeks ago when the trade happened. The Ravens got him for free. The Ravens essentially got Deontay Johnson for free. They're going to get a compensatory pick back when he signs somewhere else in free agency. They moved down in the draft about 15 spots with the pick swap that they made with the Panthers. And the Panthers are also paying almost all of Deontay Johnson's salary. So Deontay Johnson was acquired for free. The Ravens have nothing invested into Deontay Johnson. They have no reason to force him into their offense. He's a backup. That's all he is. You can drop. You don't have to hang on to Deontay Johnson. You can safely drop Deontay Johnson. I'm giving you permission to do so. You also have my permission to drop Michael Pittman. You can drop Michael Pittman. He's had the back injury all year. I know he just led the Colts in targets, but it's still the Anthony Richardson offense. He was much better. I know Anthony Richardson was much better in week 11, but the passing volume is still going to be pretty low. There's still Josh Downs there. There's not a lot of upside for Michael Pittman. Easily replaceable on the waiver wire at this point. You can drop Jake Ferguson. You can drop Aaron Rodgers. You can drop him because the Jets can't, even though they want to badly. You can drop Jalen McMillan. You can drop Demario Douglas. You can drop Xavier Leggett. You can drop Rashad Bateman. You can drop, I'm going to get some pushback on this one. You can drop Jordan Addison. I promise you, you can drop Jordan Addison. I know he's coming off a nice game, but Jordan Addison is touchdown dependent. I know he had a decent target share this week, but he was going against the Titans. Sam Darnold is slowly but surely turning back into a pumpkin. He's just not a reliable role there for Jordan Addison. He's not good enough to rise above and command a target share consistently week over week that's going to give him the fantasy production that makes him more than a replacement level player that you can find off your waiver wire. You can find a million Jordan Addisons off the waiver wire. We talked about it at the beginning of the show. Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Nick Westbrook-Akine, Jerry Jeudy, Elijah Moore. These are just examples from the last couple of weeks that give you the same production that Jordan Addison does. He's easily replaceable. These are not league winners like we talked about with the handcuff running backs. So you can drop Jordan Addison. You can do it. You can also drop Christian Watson. I know a lot of people are picking up Christian Watson. You can drop him for handcuff running backs with contingent upside. Same with Romeo Doubs, Tyler Lockett, Quentin Johnston. You can drop him as well. Wan'Dale Robinson, Russell Wilson, Pat Freiermuth, Jalen Tolbert, Dontavian Wicks, Jaleel McLaughlin, Adonai Mitchell. Those are my top 20 that you can drop. There are plenty more. If you're wondering about a player, if you should drop him or not, put it in the chat, put it in the comments of the video. I will let you know if you should drop that player. Make sure you give me some details about your league as well, because I need, like I said at the top with my extremely long disclaimer before I told you about the players you can drop, there's definitely some nuance here. You have to understand your league and your league settings. Now, Garrett in the chat is asking, is Audric Estime or Roschon Johnson a better playoff stash? And I'm pretty sure if Garrett, I know he asked this early in the show, if Garrett stuck around and watched the entire show, he already knows the answer. The answer is Roschon Johnson. I think he gives you more upside. We've seen Sean Payton. We've seen the Broncos backfield kind of just playing games. They don't know who they want. They don't know what they want to do in that backfield. I think they've gone back to Javonte. What the hell? Just when everybody in the world was picking up Audric Estime, starting Audric Estime, whoops, we're going right back to Javonte Williams. Whatever. Either way, there's just not a lot of upside. Not a lot of upside from anyone in that Broncos offense. Or, I'm sorry, Broncos backfield. I just don't see, whether it's Estime or whether it's Javonte Williams, there being huge upside. Now, definitely worth hanging on to Audric Estime a couple weeks to see what happens. But Jaleel McLaughlin's still going to be involved in his role. Audric Estime isn't much of a pass catcher anyway. This is the Bo Nix show. It's the Bo Nix show. He's their running game. I think they're going to roll with Javonte. I really do. That could change week to week. I don't know. Who knows what's happening? I'd rather have Roschon Johnson. Thoughts on Brock's? Is this? I'm assuming you're talking about Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers is a league winner. Brock Bowers. When I did my trades videos, my buys and sells videos, first week of the season, I said you gotta go buy Brock Bowers. He's already looking like he's going to be a league winner. One of my best calls of the year. One of my absolute best calls of the year. Brock Bowers is, now that I've talked about Brock Bowers for 10 minutes, Tyler has corrected. It's Brooks. Is this Christopher Brooks? Christopher Brooks with the Packers. I'm not sure why nobody uses first and last names anymore. Whatever. I'm assuming it's Christopher Brooks. Christopher Brooks, if anything happens to Josh Jacobs, it's going to be Emmanuel Wilson and Christopher Brooks. And now we've also got maybe not getting. I still didn't get the right guy. This is why we need first names, guys. This is why we need first names. Jonathan Brooks. We talked about Jonathan Brooks. Tyler, if you want to rewind, listen to what I said about Jonathan Brooks again. But at least you got my thoughts on the Packers backfield as well. Let me just finish that thought. We're also going to get Marshawn Lloyd back, maybe not at some point, even though he's this year's Kendre Miller. Maybe we don't see Marshawn Lloyd, but that's an ugly Packers backfield. But yeah. All right. So now we're talking about Jonathan Brooks. Jonathan Brooks is who Tyler meant. Come on, Tyler. I see you in these chats all the time. You can't help me out with some first names, man. Come on. Jonathan Brooks, third time's the charm. Jonathan Brooks. We did talk about Jonathan Brooks. He is my number 9 handcuff running back. He's worth stashing. Definitely worth stashing. He's a good running back. He'd be much higher on my list. I said at the time. If you want my full thoughts on Jonathan Brooks, you can rewind the show a few minutes. I talked about him in depth. But he's worth stashing. He would be higher if he wasn't coming off the ACL and if he wasn't in a bad Panthers offense. Because if anything happens to Chuba Hubbard, Jonathan Brooks would be the starter. He'd be a bell cow. He'd do well. He would do well. But the upside isn't as high as it would be in another offense and with a healthy knee. But definitely worth stashing Jonathan Brooks with that contingent upside. But he's not going to be the starter. He's not going to have a standalone value, I don't think. He's basically going to take over the Miles Sanders role. It's still a Chuba Hubbard show in Carolina. And thoughts on Rome Odunze. I love me some Rome Odunze. I have a lot of hope. I do have a lot of hope with the change of offensive coordinator that I'm hoping things start clicking. They did a little bit in week 11. Things definitely looked a lot better for the Bears offense in week 11. Caleb looked better. Just the whole operation looked better in Chicago last week. I love Rome Odunze. I've talked about him on several shows throughout the year. You've got to keep Rome Odunze stashed. He'd be the only wide receiver, one of these fringe wide receivers that I would keep stashed on my bench for the fantasy playoffs. There is a chance that he blows up. There is. He has led. I know the final numbers haven't been super great, but Rome Odunze has led the Bears in receiving yards in 3 of the 4 games since the bye week. Now, and only one of those games went over 100 yards, and only one, that was really the only game that was really usable for fantasy purposes, but it gives me some hope. What if something happens to Keenan Allen? What if they just decide, you know what, we're going to feature Rome Odunze? He's playing really well. He's getting better and better and better. We see it with these rookie wide receivers late in the season all the time. Happens all the time. Remember Amon-Ra St. Brown's rookie year? Amon-Ra was a beast over the last 6, 7, 8 weeks of the season. We could get that from Rome Odunze. He is worth stashing, hanging on to for sure. Like I said, one of the few wide receivers I'm comfortable having on my bench come fantasy playoff time. But that is our show for today. Episode 2. We've already had 2 episodes of Title Run in the books. Be sure to like and subscribe. Please like and subscribe. We have a ton of more content just like this coming over the next few days and for the rest of the season. I'll talk to you guys again on Saturday nights. Thanks, guys. Good luck this week.